City Council at 7 o'clock on May 2nd, 2022, and we are in regular session tonight. Our first item of business is establishing a quorum. All members of council are present. Next item of business is disposition of the minutes for the regular session held on April 18th, 2022. If I could have a motion for their approval.
So moved.
And a second? Second. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The minutes have been approved. We next have communications, and I don't personally have any items tonight. Do any council members have any communications tonight? If not, then we'll move on to reports and communications from other elected officials. Law Director Eliason. Okay. Auditor Hecht is not with us yet. Mayor Patterson.
The only thing I really have to share with council is, and council, you may be tracking this already, that the governor last week had a big reveal, and that was basically that he would like to invest $500 million into the 32 Appalachian counties, stretching all the way from basically Youngstown, Ohio, Ashtabula, all the way on down to just this side of Cincinnati. So this is fascinating to hear about. It's going to be $50 million at this point in time for planning, a planning phase, and then $450 million for projects throughout the Appalachian counties. We'll see how this plays out in the future, but that was wonderful news to hear. I can tell you that the Mayor's Partnership for Progress is really interested in this particular endeavor. The other thing I'd like to share with City Council is I was invited last Friday, to go to Chillicothe, and it was speaking on behalf of Athens County veterans and adjoining counties with the Veterans Administration potentially closing down the Chillicothe VA hospital and moving it to Dayton, which would have a significant impact on veterans in our area, especially with having to try and find a way to get there and back. And we had the Secretary of the Veterans Administration, Secretary Madonna, who was there as well, which was really good for him to hear. There was about 20 veterans who were in that meeting speaking about the impacts that we would experience in Central and Southeast Ohio if that VA hospital were to close down. So hopeful that maybe it resonated with the Secretary, but we'll see what happens moving forward.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on now to ordinances for third reading. The first ordinance is 5022. This is an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to accept bids where necessary and enter into contract for replacement of the community center roof. This is project number 353, introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. As discussed at committee in first reading, reviewed at second reading, I'll go ahead and read pertinent sections of this ordinance. Section 1, the Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to advertise and accept bids where necessary and enter into contract with the lowest and best bidder or use one of the city's cooperative purchasing programs for replacement of the community center roof, project number 353. Section 2, the 2022 Appropriation Ordinance 15021 is hereby amended by appropriating from the unappropriated balance the following sums: $5,000 to Community Center Phase 2 Fund, that's 272, $115,900 to the APR Income Tax Fund 273. Section 3, the Service Safety Director is further authorized to expend up to $432,900 as follows: $317,000 from Community Center Phase 2 Fund 272, and this will close that fund. So after this money is authorized to expend, 272 will be closed. $115,900 from APR Income Tax Fund 273. Thank you, President Leslie.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve 5022. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. And are there any comments or questions from council members? Yes, Councilmember Swank.
These are just very simple timeline questions for Mr. Stone. Assuming the bidding process goes as it should, Do you anticipate, or let me ask you, what do you anticipate the timeline being for two things? Number one, installation of the roof, the repair of the new roof, and then the second thing would be the installation of the solar panels on that roof.
Sure. Thank you, Member Swank. So the roof itself, our goal is to get that done in this calendar year. So we're going to bid immediately, assuming we get good bids, get the contractor started. The solar panels, while there are rack components associated with this particular bid and this installation, the solar panels are contingent upon this body accepting the power purchase agreement, which is a piece of legislation we hope to bring forward here in the next several weeks. Ideally, it's very close to ready to go, but I do not see construction on that project happening until 2023. So, in the perfect world, the roof and the racks go on in 2022 before the snow flies, and then in the beginning of 2023 or sometime in early construction season of 2023, we would start to see panels going on the roof.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Just one.
Councilmember Spilius, yes.
Thank you, President Isley. Just one quick question. So how many years is this roof supposed to be good for?
In the ideal world, I'd get 40 years out of it, but that's not the level of roof that we're buying. So probably between 25 and 30 years is our goal.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions or comments from other elected officials or from our audience members? Okay, if not, we'll have the vote. All those in favor signify by saying,
I don't think I have a motion second.
yes, you do.
Sorry.
Sam and Ben.
I made a motion to approve.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ben second.
Yep, okay. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. 5122 is an ordinance approving a memorandum of understanding with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, known as AFSCME, Local 24031, Ohio Council 8, AFL-CIO Union, introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 5122.
Second.
Thank you, Member Ziff. As discussed at committee and at first reading and reviewed at second reading, this is regarding the meter repair positions and eliminating that position from the city staffing ordinance, and then changing the parking enforcement positions from A4 to A5. And I'll just read section 1 of this ordinance. The mayor is hereby authorized to execute a memorandum of understanding with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 3351, a copy of which is attached and incorporated herein. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Do we have any questions or comments from council members? Any questions or comments from other elected officials or administration or our audience members? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. 5222 is an ordinance amending the 2022 staffing levels and pay grades authorized by Ordinance 14121, introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 5222.
Second.
As discussed at committee and at first reading, this is about the parking enforcement positions, amending the staffing ordinance to update the elimination of the meter repair position and the increase in the number of parking enforcement positions to reflect the elimination of the repair person, and also to remove the groundskeeper position from the pay band 2. It is a union position at staffing. So this also removes that lands and buildings groundskeeper. Thank you, President Isley.
So we have a motion and second for approval of 5222. Any comments or questions from council members, administration, other elected officials, or the audience? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. 5322 is an ordinance amending the 2022 appropriation ordinance and is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 5322.
Second.
Thank you, Member Grace. I'll go ahead and read section 1 here, which outlines the items to be approved. $6,000 to the general fund for the Ohio Governor's Imagination Library. $20,000 to the Street Rehabilitation Fund, $572 for the Ohio Public Works Commission payment for the Stimson Avenue project, and $1,000 to the Stormwater Fund for postage. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay, we have a motion and second for approval of 5322. Any questions or comments? Council members, administration, other elected officials, or our audience? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. 5422 is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to pay the 2022 membership fee for the Outdoor Recreation Council of Appalachia, known as ORCA, to provide financial support from the city's transient guest tax for the Bailey's Trail System, along with other recreational activities. Introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 5422.
Second.
Thank you, Member Grace. As discussed at committee and on readings, this is our 2022 membership. It is contingent upon the county also having provided the same level of financial support, which they have done for 2022. I'll remind everyone that we had a presentation from ORCA Executive Director Jesse Powers on this issue, and that the City of Athens is a founding member of ORCA. And this $90,000 membership payment will come from our transient guest tax. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay, we have a motion and second for approval. Any questions or comments from council members, administration, other elected officials, audience? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. Our next one is 5522, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to make application and enter into a project agreement with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. This is introduced by Councilmember McCary.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion that we adopt 5522.
Second.
Okay. Well, this is hopefully going to bring us some revenue that can be helpful for construction projects, and there's not much to this one. So I'd like to recommend that we adopt 5522.
Okay, we have a motion and second for approving this ordinance so that the city can apply for grant applications. Any other questions or comments from council members, administration, elected officials, or our audience? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. And the last of our third readings for tonight, 5622 is an ordinance authorizing construction of tennis and pickleball courts. This is project number 350, introduced by Councilmember McCary.
Thank you, President Isley. I would like to make a motion that we adopt 5622.
Second.
This has been discussed at length, committee, and we are looking forward to moving forward on this project after long discussions. So I'll recommend that we adopt 5622.
Okay, we have a motion and second for approval. Do we have questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Reisner?
Just to clarify things about the funding structure for this, can the administration explain to me where the funding will come from, since I believe that's going to cost a little more than we originally thought?
Sure, so 3 different locations, or actually 2 different locations, 2 different funds specifically, so 273 and the 286 fund, which is ARPA money. The 273 is the APR income tax fund. We've already put some money in for design to the tune of approximately $28,000 or so. And then we've got $250,000 appropriated from that fund, and then $50,000 from ARPA for a total expenditure of new appropriations of $300,000 with total authorization of $328,250.
Thank you. It was the ARPA funding I was unsure of. Thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments from council members? Yes, Councilmember Swank.
This is a tough one. It really is a very tough one. On one hand, we've heard from many people, both here in this chamber, by email, phone call, text, that we really need pickleball courts in this town. And I would agree with that 100%. A quick Google search of the fastest growing sport in America will pop up pickleball 99 times out of 100. What makes this tough is that when we vote for this tonight, unless I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, we lose all control of what this project is going to look like. We allocate the money as the legislative branch of city government and turn it over to the administration for them to exercise their administrative rights and responsibilities. And that is appropriate, and that's how our government works. But in addition to all of those emails and phone calls and people standing here before us, we have a big disconnect. And the disconnect is between the plans that we have seen, and I put those plans in quotation marks because they could be drawn on the back of a cocktail napkin as to what we've seen so far, and what the pickleball community is saying that we need. The pickleball community is telling us we don't need lights, yet there are lights in those plans. The pickleball community ideally would like the tennis courts and the pickleball courts in one complex, but they're not. We talk about increasing tourism in this town, and pickleball is a way to do that. There are tournaments all over the state of Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Yet because we're not going to construct tournament-ready pickleball courts because of space limitations, we won't be able to bring those people to Athens. So I guess my request would be a sincere one, is that before we put a shovel in the ground, that we listen very closely to those most affected by this. Those hundreds of people, and there are hundreds of people in this town who play this sport for enjoyment, for exercise and recreation, and try to align the finished product with the needs of that community. I plan to vote for this, but I also hope sincerely that we'll listen a little bit more before we start building this project.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from council members, elected officials, administration, audience members? Okay. Ready for the vote? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay?
Nay.
Okay, so we have one opposing, 6-1 vote. And the motion carries and the ordinance is approved. We now have ordinances for second reading. 5722 is an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to close Union Street between Court and College for the Athena Ride for Women and to change or cancel the requested date as necessary. This is introduced by Councilmember Reisner. And I read through the title. If no questions or comments, and I will pause briefly to see if there are any questions or comments. If not, we'll move on to reading the next ordinance for second reading. Okay, seeing no questions, we'll move on to 5822. This is an ordinance authorizing the 2022 street paving and repairs project number 352, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. Any comments or questions? If none, we'll move on to 5922. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title I, General Provisions, Chapter 1.03, Code Fees Established, to add Section 7.05.031D, Application Fee for Residential Parking Permit, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. If no questions or comments from anyone, we'll move on to 6022. This is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to submit an application and enter into an agreement with the Ohio Development Services Agency for any eligible community development block grant, CDBG, program funds for program year 2022, introduced by Councilmember McCary. If no comments or questions, we'll move on to 6122. This is an ordinance amending the 2022 appropriation ordinance and amending ordinance 1722 to increase the authorized expenditure for structural repairs to the Athens Fire Department headquarters, project number 343, introduced by Councilmember McCary. And if no comments or questions, we will move on to 6222. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 9, General Regulations, Chapter 3.03, Fireworks, Explosives, and Inflammables, Section 3.03.03, Sale and Use of Fireworks, introduced by Councilmember McCary. And if no comments or questions on this one, we will move on to 6322. Okay. An ordinance opting out of House Bill 172 and reaffirming the ban on discharging, igniting, or exploding fireworks in the city of Athens is set forth in Athens City Code, Chapter 9.03, Fireworks, Explosives, and Inflammables. If no questions, yes, Mayor Patterson.
I just have a comment because this came up and it's appropriate at this point in time. It came up at safety this morning at 9 o'clock where I had the fire chief, the police chief, one of the individuals from Engineering and Public Works. Anyway, the fire chief informed me that over the weekend that they were able to apprehend an individual who was shooting Roman candles from the rooftop of a building here in the uptown area. So a prime example as to having this particular piece of legislation go forward. We have some very old buildings with some very old roofs. And to see a Roman candle, ball go shooting into someone's roof and then all of a sudden that thing becomes a tinderbox and away it goes, is just wrong. So, again, it's timely, so.
Good, we're moving forward with it then.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you for the comment. We'll move on now to Ordinance 6422. This is an ordinance granting a special right-of-way use permit to Rockstar LLC, the owner and care of Brent Hartman, 67 Columbus Road, to allow 27 parking spaces for use by the Ohio Valley Museum. This is introduced by Councilmember Grace. If no comments or questions, we will move on to 6522. This is an ordinance accepting a certificate of registration from Windstream Kentucky Data Link for use of the city's right-of-way, introduced by Councilmember Grace. If no comments or questions, we'll move on to 6622. An ordinance amending the 2022 appropriation ordinance 15021 and authorizing the auditor to make an interfund transfer. This is introduced by Councilmember Crowell. 6721 is an ordinance approving a memorandum of understanding with the, I should pause, I'm sorry, for 6622, if no questions or comments, then we will move on to 6722. 6722 is an ordinance approving a memorandum of understanding with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, Local 3351, Ohio Council 8, AFL-CIO Union, amending Article 24, Command Pay, introduced by Councilmember Crowell. And if no questions or comments, we'll move on to 6822. This is an ordinance amending the 2022 staffing levels and pay grades authorized by Ordinance 14121 and declaring an emergency, introduced by the Finance and Personnel Committee. Councilmember Crowell, yes.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to amend 06822.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Grace. As council knows, we have been, the city administration and the fire chief have been working to reorganize the fire department. This ordinance focuses on reducing the captains from 3 to 1 and increasing the lieutenants from 3 to 6. We discussed at committee and in a number of instances about the retirement of firefighters and trying to align some of the upcoming retirements to restructuring this department. And I believe that Service Safety Director Stone has some more information about an amendment to this ordinance.
Thank you, Member Crowell. So this ordinance reduces the number of captains in the staffing ordinance from 3 to 1, increases the number of lieutenants from 3 to 6, and maintains firefighters as it is right now at 15. What I'm asking this evening, based upon some new information I received this morning from the fire chief, is to have a temporary provision increasing the amount of firefighters in the ordinance, once this passes, from 15 to 17, that sunsets upon the promotion of 2 lieutenants back to 15. And the purpose for this is the next Ohio Fire Academy class that we're going to be able to get some of our new hires into is in August. Paid departments have priority in getting personnel into the course, and they will bump personnel that are coming from like volunteer departments and such. However, you don't gain that priority unless you have the people actually on the books. Promotion to lieutenant will take 30 days to 6 weeks. Once we have this passed and we post those lieutenant positions, allow people to study, test for the position, and then do the hiring. And so while that time is happening, we'd really like to be hiring those additional personnel that ultimately will backfill those lieutenants, which will allow us to get them slated against that August Ohio Fire Academy course. And so we're not asking really to grow the department as far as end strength, like that are people that are physically present, but because of that delta of time while those lieutenants are getting promoted after that increase happens, I'd like to have the temporary increase of 15 to 17 that would then sunset upon the promotion of 2 of the lieutenants. That's my request.
And that language sounds sufficiently clear. Does anybody else, any of the council members have any questions? So this is a temporary increase of the number of firefighters from 15 to 17, and it will sunset on the promotion of the 2 lieutenants. Okay. All right, so we have a motion and second. Any other discussion, questions, or comments from council members, administration, elected officials, or our audience members? If not, all those in favor of the proposed amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. The amendment has been passed and the ordinance has been read for the first time. We'll now move on to Ordinance 6922. And this is an ordinance amending certain sections of Ordinance 14221. The 2022 Fringe Benefits Package for Non-Union Personnel within the City of Athens, introduced by the Finance and Personnel Committee. And if no questions or comments, we will move on to 7022. This is an ordinance authorizing the auditor to conduct an amnesty program to encourage the payment of delinquent income tax accounts and declaring an emergency. It's introduced by Councilmember Crowell. And if no questions or comments, then we will move on to 7122. This is an ordinance authorizing an agreement with the City of Cleveland, Ohio for services relating to the collection of income tax, introduced by Councilmember Crowell. And if no questions or comments, we will now move on to our ordinances for first reading. 7222 is an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise and accept bids for construction and construction engineering of a city-county sewer expansion project number 317 and declaring an emergency. This is introduced by Councilmember McCary.
Thank you, President Nisley. I'll go ahead and read Section 1 first. The Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to advertise and accept bids upon approval by the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency for construction and construction engineering of city sewer lines between Stagecoach Road and Dairy Lane, and improvements to the existing Dairy Lane sewer as part of the city-county sewer expansion project number 317. This was just discussed at our last meeting, and that's it.
Okay. Do we have any questions or comments from council members, administration, elected officials, or our audience?
So I guess I
Yes.
do have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
So is this going to be all within the city? This is not all within the city limits then? We're talking about places that are outside the city limits. Is that correct or no? Because it's close there.
Yes, please.
So all construction of this project is for city sewer inside the city limits. And then at the limits, at 3 different points, 2 of which are included in this project, one that's in a subsequent project 330, which will come up in a subsequent ordinance, we have a transfer point, basically, where the county system will go and connect to the city system. But this construction all takes place inside the city, construct sewers and appurtenances that will support not only expansion in order to accept the county sewage, but also is then available for city use of city facilities and new city construction in those areas, private construction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If not, we'll move on to 7322. This is an ordinance amending the 2022 appropriation ordinance 15021 and ordinance 5421, authorizing wastewater remote site telemetry improvements, which is project number 339, introduced by Councilmember McCary.
Thank you, President Nisley. As discussed at our last meeting, this is really a technological upgrade matter to improve communication with our wastewater remote site improvements. So this is going to be in line with our efforts to be as technologically sound as possible. That's all.
Okay. Any questions or comments about this ordinance from council members, administration, elected officials, or our audience? Okay. If not, we'll move on to 7422. This is an ordinance authorizing construction and construction engineering of slip repair on the Bikeway Spur between Armitage Road and University Estates Boulevard, project number 348, introduced by Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me read the pertinent sections here. Section 1, the Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to advertise, accept bids, and enter into contracts for construction and construction engineering for repairing the slip on the Bikeway Spur between Armitage Road and University Estates Boulevard, project number 348. Section 2, the 2022 Appropriation Ordinance 150-21 is hereby amended by appropriating from the unappropriated balance the sum of $650,000 to Street Fund 220 Transaction Code 500 and increasing the total appropriations by said amount. Section 3, the Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to expend up to $675,000 from Street Fund 220, Transaction Code 500, for the said project. Thank you.
Okay. We'll open it up for questions and comments. Councilmember Spielness.
President Isley. As you know, I have some concerns about this. I live up the street from here, and I have watched the building of it and the slow and often quick destruction of this bike path. So I brought along some pictures so you get a sense of this. I'm sure not everybody walks this, to give you a sense, and that was emailed out to folks, but I just want to show you 3 so people can see it. Start with this one. This is what it looks like on one of them. Okay, and then I want to show that one of the things that concerns me greatly is that we have what's called hillside seepage. I would say that it's there are some natural springs, I think, that come out of the hill. And there has been some efforts to deal with that, of course. But it's continuing and will continue, I'm sure, unless we do something pretty drastic, which, of course, we're talking about. Now, I also want to just show you just a sense of, this is what it's like all the way down. So that was the worst one you saw in the beginning, and there's all the way down. I promise not to show any more pictures, but you have them for your view. And again, I want to give you a sense that yes, there needs to be something done about it, but I'm not sure if we have enough information to make an informed decision about how much money needs to be spent to repair this problem. So what I'm preparing is a list of questions. Director Stone was gracious enough to send me the contract, geotechnical report, and other information which I have read through. And based on that, I'm going to prepare some questions to, I'm hoping, give us a better idea of what really happened and what we should do going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. The ordinance under consideration only mentions the Bikeway Spur, but I did want to confirm with Member Spielness as well as City Administration that there also is a water line and underground electricity that will also be protected by the expenditure here under consideration. Is that correct?
Thank you, Member Crow. The precipitating event that led to this particular slip was a break in the water line that feeds the tank at University Estates. So it's the main artery to feed that particular portion of the city. As part of the repair to that, and because the department was concerned that it would continue to slip and continue to break and jeopardize the water supply of that portion of the city, the department moved the water line into the bike path. So previously it was aligned parallel to the bike path outside of the construction footprint, much closer to the creek that runs up that ravine. It now is installed in the bike path. So any further slipping of the path will jeopardize not only the path itself, but also the water line that has been moved into the path into the bike path. Additionally, there is high voltage electric that shares this space, not right on top of the water line, but nearby, that provides the power supply to University Estates. And while that's not the city's responsibility, this repair will protect that high voltage electric that's underground from moving should there be a catastrophic slip that were to continue on that hillside.
Thank you. Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, Director Stone. And I'm not an engineer, so let me just say that straight up. But I believe that the repair that's being proposed for this site is a pretty significant, and I forgot the name of the type of wall. It's not a it's a
Plug wall.
Thank you.
It is a drilled pier retaining wall, but a plug wall has piers in between, the sections of concrete I-beam that are socketed into the bedrock, rather than putting lagging. I think I spoke the last time about lagging, and since then I've talked to engineer Auditor, and he mentioned that this particular design is going to be a plug wall.
Okay, so a pretty significant, we hope, fix, maybe costly, but hopefully to protect that utility as well as the
Correct.
Spur. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Councilmember Swank.
As we all know, semantics and interpretations and impressions are very, very important. I got another call, and I can't really repeat it because of the language in the call, but essentially was we're going to spend another $650,000 on a bike path. What you just described and what we talked about last week after the meeting is this is an infrastructure project, water and electricity. And I'm just wondering, and again, it's just semantics, but these sort of things tend to blossom out of control and get misinterpreted. Somehow rephrasing this or re-emphasizing, short of mailing everybody a letter telling them what we're doing, that this is an infrastructure project. This is really not a bike project. And I don't know how we do that other than to tell people as we talk with them, but the calls have already started. $650,000 for another repair of something we've already repaired. And it may be minute, but we're hearing it already, and that's a lot of money.
So, and we had talked about briefly, and I'll just make an aside comment, but last week we said, well, the project's always been known as the Bikeway Spur, and so Auditor Hecht was, I think, interested in continuing to call it that, but I wonder if, possibly inserting into the title, a construction engineering of infrastructure slip repair located on the Bikeway Spur, so by inserting 2 words, but that's just a thought on that. And Mayor Patterson, go
I
ahead.
just had a comment, and I appreciate your comments, Councilmember Swank. You know, I would contend in the active transportation world, where we have multimodal infrastructure elements, that a bike path is a piece of the city's infrastructure, much like a street is a piece of the city's infrastructure. But I really appreciate the fact that, yes, we have underground utilities that is also infrastructure that is being armored with this particular project. I agree, this is expensive. I would also contend that the money that went into building it to begin with was a lot of money. It was expensive. But we see that again with street and road repair. We're gonna pay, we're gonna have $500,000 going to street rehab this summer, much like we do every year with all of our street rehab. And yes, it's expensive. But I would contend that the whole thing is an infrastructure project.
And to dovetail on the mayor's comments, I did try very hard to try to mitigate this problem, and the staff tried very hard to try to mitigate this problem without going to a drilled pier solution. A drilled pier solution is a 100% solution. It's not and that's why you do it ultimately, because you're sure when you make that decision that you're going to spend the money to socket I-beams into bedrock, that the hillside's not going to slide anymore. There are other attempts that we made with both, attempting to capture some of the drainage, as Member Speldas noted in some of her photos. And we talked extensively about building a keyway down at the toe of the slope in order to arrest movement, but a significant amount of cost would have occurred with that as well, and wouldn't have been a 100% solution. So based upon the borings associated with the geotechnical report and what that geotechnical engineer said, which is basically, if you want to be sure, this is the cost associated with it. We did check on the changing the project name in FinQ, our system based upon your comment last week, Member Swank. I really tried to do that, and there's a technical barrier to changing the project name in that, and then associating the previous costs with the project name, like for posterity. But certainly if President Nisley's suggestion is viable to change the title of the ordinance without changing the project name, I think that, that would help communicate it better.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Councilmember Spelness. Yes.
Yeah, I read over the GCI report regarding what happened. And I read through Jessica Dine's comments throughout that report about the slippage that was happening well before the water main break. And the water main break happened in April of 2019. At that time, my husband and I were driving home and we saw it happen. In fact, we think that we're the ones who reported it to the city. So we have a very a bird's eye view of what happened. It was literally shooting up into the sky. The thing is that the water that we saw was all across the street from where the bike path was, entirely across the street. So that's why I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea that this was entirely the fault of a water main break. And reading over the notes, I'm not seeing that that's exactly what it says. Yes.
Mayor Patterson.
If I may, I remember 2019, that break. So there was 2 breaks up there. One was right along the Boulevard, where there was a slip, and that did lead to a geyser and repairs having to be made. But then there was a break on the bike path spur as well. So I think we're talking 2 different significant waterline breaks.
Okay, thank you. All right, if no other comments or questions, we'll Move on to Ordinance 7522. This is an ordinance authorizing final design of project number 313, renovation of the Armory, introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'll go ahead and read pertinent sections. Section 1, the Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to enter into contract for final design of Project 313. Section 2, the 2022 Appropriation Ordinance is hereby amended by appropriating from the unappropriated balance the sum of $165,000 to Capital Improvements Fund 580. In Section 3, the Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to expend up to $774,000 from Capital Improvements Fund 580 for all costs to date associated with said Project 313. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have questions or comments from council members, administration, elected officials, or the audience? Okay, thank you. Big, long project. Yes, Mayor Patterson.
No, after 10-plus years, it's just exciting to see us get to this point. As a city council member, in the past 6-plus years as mayor, we did have Lieutenant Governor come through and tour the building last Thursday to actually better understand and see the project, to where I believe in the intel that I received, he was impressed with where this is going. And then also last week, I was asked to sit on a panel. Actually, it was just two of us, an individual from North Carolina talking about a project going on in North Carolina, and myself talking about our use of local and American Rescue Plan dollars with the Armory project. And I was asked to be on this by the Appalachian Regional Commission as well as EPA, and received a letter this morning from co-chair Gail Manchin, ARC co-chair, to which she said that it was fascinating to see this, and this is basically a showcase case going forward to the rest of the Appalachian region for a good use of American Rescue Plan dollars to have something like this happen. But today we're talking about capital improvements.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will move on to Ordinance 7622. This is an ordinance amending the 2022 Appropriation Ordinance, introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'll go ahead and read the pertinent section. The 2022 Appropriation Ordinance is hereby amended by appropriating from the unappropriated balance the following sums: $200,000 to the General Fund Auditor to cover income tax refunds, $7,000 to the General Fund Lands and Buildings for tool replacement, $8,000 to the Recreation Fund 270 for a municipal pool maintenance contract and lifeguard pre-certification costs, $8,500 to the Community Center Fund 271 for floor resurfacing, and $40 to the DRD Fund 596 to cover county auditor fees. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay. Any comments or questions? If none,
I have a
yes.
A
Councilmember
question
Frank.
about the floor resurfacing. In one of the meetings, last two or three, either here or Arts, Parks, and Recreation, and this is to Mr. Stone, the question was asked about, in regards to pickleball, a matte finish or a less glossy finish than what we currently have. And I'm just wondering, two questions. First one is where we might be on that.
We did inquire with the vendor that we're going to use to do the refinishing, and the feedback was for a commercial grade finish, that a gloss or semi-gloss finish is really basically what's done. And attempting to get a matte finish is not done for both wear purposes as well as cleaning purposes for a commercial grade use. They said they don't ever do matte finishes, is the feedback that we got.
Okay, well, the reason I ask, I talked to a local gym floor contractor, and he said it doesn't make a bit of difference. So I'm not disputing what you shared with us, and I'm not questioning it, but I'm just saying that, and speaking with a local contractor who does gym floors, many in Southeast Ohio, it really doesn't make any difference in durability. This is his opinion, not mine. I'm not a floor person. So that's question number one. I guess question number two is, do we, since the project was supposed to start today, do we normally start projects before council authorizes the expenditure of money?
Certainly. Thank you for that question. This is a replacement for an unanticipated cost in the budget. So the budgeted money is there and we can expend it. Basically, given that our Arts Rec and Rec Director was relatively new, when we planned the budget last year, this is not something that we put in to this budget, and that's why we asked for it to be put in here. I certainly am mindful of coming through during the year and asking for these small appropriations. Really, that's not a good way to do business. A better way to do business is just to have the budget start at the beginning of the year, not having to have these discussions throughout the year, so we can talk about issues that are really minor issues. So in the future, we'll consider that more. In this particular instance, we're just asking this body to consider replacing it for an unanticipated cost, so that later in the year that budget is available for other things.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to 7722. This is an ordinance authorizing retroactive pay for the Chief Deputy Clerk in Athens County Municipal Court, and is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'll go ahead and read the whereases and pertinent sections. Whereas a pay study was required to establish the pay grade for this new position, and whereas the pay study is now complete and the pay grade has been established, and whereas the said employee was promoted by Judge Grace to the position of Chief Deputy Clerk in January 2022 at an hourly rate less than the hourly rate established for the said paid grade. Section 1, Athens City Council does hereby authorize a retroactive payment to the January 2022 hire date of the Chief Deputy Clerk of Athens County Municipal Court of $247.26, an increase in the hourly rate of pay from $19.58 to $20.10 per hour. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? If not, we will move on to 7822, an ordinance amending the auditor's 2022 staffing levels and compensation for the seasonal pool manager, authorized by Ordinance 14121, introduced by the Finance and Personnel Committee.
Thank you, President Isley. Section 1 of this ordinance reads, the 2022 staffing levels in the auditor's office and compensation for the seasonal pool manager, authorized by Ordinance 14121, are hereby amended to read as attached hereto and incorporated herein by reference. And the attachment, is a little bit, it's the second page for those in council, or the third page, which indicates that the pay range will be changed from 13 to 16 to $16 to $4 above. So that's 16 to 20. Thank you, President Isley.
Yes. Service Director Stone?
Sure, and this is my mistake for not having carefully reviewed this, but I believe there's a typographical error between the two ordinances because it makes reference to the auditor's office staffing level with the pool manager. And so that the pool manager is not in the auditor's office. I think that's just a copy from the auditor does a lot of amazing things for this city, but manage the pool is not one of them. So and that's I should have looked at that more closely. So,
Is that a typo, and is it just eliminating auditor?
yeah, I think so. It's just the staffing ordinance. So perhaps that could be a typographical error or a clerical error and not have to return back
Yeah,
to previous.
okay, thank you. Thanks for noting that. Would have gone right on by us.
Oops.
Okay.
It might cause confusion moving forward with previous later
Right.
readings.
Any other comments or questions? All right. Ordinance 7922 is an ordinance authorizing a pay increase due to additional duties assigned to the position of Executive Administrator in the Auditor's Office, introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I believe this is where the confusion started between these two back-to-back ordinances. But I'll just go ahead and read this. Whereas the payroll administrator, retitled to Executive Administrator as per Ordinance 7822, has taken on the additional duties of an administrative assistant. Section 1, Athens City Council does hereby authorize an hourly increase in pay of $1 for the executive administrator position in the auditor's office from $21.71 to $22.71. And in the staffing ordinance attached to the previous ordinance, this would add the executive administrator position to the staffing ordinance and remove the administrative assistant within the auditor's office. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll now move on to a one reading resolution. This is R222, a resolution expressing support for the Athens County Municipal Court to apply to participate in the Cities and Counties for Fine and Fee Justice 2022-2023 cohort, introduced by all members of council. And we did have a presentation from Judge Grace last week in support of this program. And as we understand, the City of Athens would be one of 5 cities applying for this, and would, as I understand, enable the court system to look at the fine and fee structure, in a sense, a study for ways of alleviating some of the fines that have been perhaps caused, or they cause inequitable situations for folks, and this would be equalizing things. Any comments or questions? Yes. Oh, we have Councilmember Swank, and then we'll go with Mary Abel. Yes, Councilmember Swank.
I don't know, she was a state representative, she may have rank on me here. I have quite a few questions on this. Although what you just said clarified it. They're going to pick 5 people who apply, 5 entities that apply. And those who get picked are going to get some money, I understand. And with that money, they're going to look into issues of equity, I guess, relative to fines and fees. Where my questions come in are some contacts I had from 3 individuals in the 4th Ward about this, and some research. It seems that the judge already has this power. On March 22nd, 2019, Ohio Revised Code 2323.311 became effective. Before this new statutory section was passed, Ohio law did not provide a uniform process for determining indigency or lack of ability to pay in civil cases. But it's not codified. And in fact, there are even formulas. The enactment of 2223.311, courts must accept waivers for people whose household income is below 187.5% of the federal poverty line, and may accept waivers for those whose income is higher than the guidelines but are not required to do so. That's civil cases. The Ohio Supreme Court costs are mandatory, but trial courts retain jurisdiction to waive, suspend, or modify the payment of cost at the time of sentencing. And in fact, last week, Judge Grace cited a case where there is a fee of $360 or maybe a fine, and for good behavior on a monthly basis, that can be reduced in $30 increments. So I guess maybe I just don't understand this thing totally, but my question is, our statement too, it appears that we already have provisions in state law that allow a judge to exercise his or her judicial expertise and power to take into account one's ability to pay. And I'm just wondering what this is going to do. Let me take it one step further. If I were and again, this is based on my understanding, if I were the one granting this grant, and that's essentially what it is a grant, for someone to study this, and then found out they already have the ability to do it, that just seems a little odd.
Okay, thanks for the comments and the question. Do we have other comments from council members? And if not, then we'll move to Mary Abel. Yes.
Thank you. Mary Abel, 48 Strathmore, Athens. Actually, I watched the discussion last week and heard the questions. And the one thing that I didn't hear was that in Ohio, a judge already has the authority to mitigate those fees. So my question, or maybe a clarification, is given this resolution, what impact does it have other than, council saying, okay, or we agree with this? Because the authority is already there. I understand that this definitely can lead to down the street having some financial implications for the city, as was pointed out by Auditor Heck. But correct me if I'm wrong, but judges already have that authority to mitigate those fees.
Councilmember Corral, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with you. As far as I understand it, I agree with you and Member Swank that the judge does have a lot of leeway to regulate these fees. However, this resolution simply supports him applying for this program. So we're not approving and supporting him to making changes to the fees. As you said, he can do that. He has expressed interest in applying to this program, having gone to the boot camp with the mayor, and this is like many grants where you receive a letter of support from different organizations to make your application stronger. This is supporting him entering this program, this cohort. So I'm not sure. I think we're going outside of some of of the breadth of this by, wondering what will happen. This is about investigation of what these changes would mean. I appreciate what you said about the auditor's comments. The auditor rightfully wants us to be very careful to think about not only the stability of the financial stability of the individuals who come before the court, but of the city of Athens too. This will have a profound impact on how the courts are paid for. So that needs to be part of the investigation, part of the conversation. But I'm in support of this resolution simply for expressing support for the judge to enter into this cohort.
Yeah, and we'll go with Councilmember Spielness, and then we'll go to Councilmember Grace. And I do believe we were urged by someone if I'm recalling the conversation, by someone within the state of Ohio to apply.
The Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court Justice. So, yes, Councilmember Spielness.
Yeah, I think that, well, I agree with your comments, and of course, he does have the right, but having the right and trying to do it in a judicious way so that you know that you are being responsible to your city and responsible for, the auditor's concerns. And trying to determine what best practices are, to me, are really legitimate. And the fact that the Supreme Court Justice is supporting this program, what have we got to lose? I mean, I think this is Judge Grace trying to be irresponsible, responsible in his duties to the city and the state, and perhaps we can be a model, and that would be fantastic.
Councilmember Grace.
So I hesitate to say too much on this, as my last name is Grace and the judge is my spouse. But just for clarity, there is an opinion issued for the Ohio Ethics Commission that very clearly states that for me to participate in this discussion is not a conflict of interest, because for it to be a conflict of interest, I would have to be participating in a discussion that could lead to a change in law that would financially or otherwise benefit my family. And that is not what this resolution would do. So I just put that out to allay concerns. And yes, in Ohio, judges have the authority to set court cost. This is more about studying the social justice impact and ways to adjust and moderate court costs in a way so that it is equitable and to have better ascertain how to make those adjustments in the most sustainable and fair way. And another important thing to keep in mind is that while Judge Grace is currently the judge in municipal court and could make the decision to increase, decrease, or eliminate court cost, he has that authority. He will not forever be the judge in municipal court. And much like any of us, there will be future individuals in these positions. And to have the support of City Council and the research that will come from being a part of this cohort will create a record of the value of what is done, so that then there is more thought moving forward for future judges, future administrations, about how to, in the most equitable way, determine court cost. So it rather than the judge just unilaterally making decisions, it brings in the voices of the community. And really the idea is to determine what our community's values are and be sure that there's community support for this, because there is a cost to maintaining the court. And so those decisions will have better long-standing support if they're made with input rather than just unilaterally by the judge, is what my understanding of one of the benefits of being in this cohort, as well as the information that would be received through participation.
Thank you.
And the mayor could probably speak to some of this as he attended the camp also, or the training and information session. But yeah, the city was advised to participate by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Okay. Now, before we go, Councilmember Swank, if we could just give anybody else an opportunity. If any other council members want to make a comment? Okay, we're fine. Back to you, Councilmember Swank.
So I guess the takeaway I hear from these last two comments, that this would give the court and the judge expertise that currently does not exist.
Councilmember
Member
Spilnes, offer a
Because-
I
comment? think
think it's really about finding out what the community wants and what can be viewed as the most important. So it's not about his expertise, obviously, as a judge, but it is about what the community wants and what's best practices. So,
That's what I meant.
yeah.
And he did, Judge Grace commented last week that he's going to be working with other local
Right,
agencies.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Mayor Patterson?
I'll be quick, and it's just to tell Councilmember Grace, you summed it up rather well. So there's nothing really more to add. I think what this will do, quite honestly, as a community-wide effort, because that's what the grant is all about, the $75,000 or $50,000 that you are awarded is basically to put together multiple meetings throughout the year to bring stakeholders together to discuss this and for people to understand the structure of fines and fees. And to Councilmember Swank's point, for the citizens to understand that a judge does have powers that, I don't think the public knows that or realizes that by and large. Jack Freck, who is an individual in residence of the Voinovich School, came out with a document just the other day for the Mayor's Partnership for Progress, which was fascinating, and it all had to do with loss of your driver's license. Yet people still have to get to work, and if you are pulled over and apprehended, you don't have a driver's license, you don't have insurance, the fines are steep. The fees are equally steep, and in some cases even steeper, to where this person will never get out from underneath this financial burden from an economic standpoint. And I think it'll shed light on things like that that we're not even thinking about. This is with the court's fees and fines, although the driver's license issue is fees and fines as well. So, if nothing else, it'll be informative for everyone.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for all the comments and questions. And I think we would entertain a motion to approve this one reading resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. And all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the resolution is approved. We'll move on to announcements and other business. Next week, we will be having a committee meeting. So council chairs, committee chairs, please get your information to our clerk, Debbie Walker, by Wednesday, and staff. If there's any supporting documents or information that we need, that would be a help. We now have 3 appointees to the Recreation Advisory Board, and I believe Councilmember McCary, is that action?
Yes, thank you, President Isley. I have 3 for appointment to our Recreation Advisory Board, starting with Ash Allenson, who brings skills in fitness, competitive sports, and individual sports. Second, we have Andrea Lewis, with experience in community engagement, youth engagement, and aquatics. And third and finally, Rebecca Dillon, with experience in community events, fitness, and competitive sports. I'd like to recommend them for appointment.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of the appointment of these 3 persons to the Recreation Advisory Board, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries, and we thank them for their volunteer work. Yes, Mayor Patterson.
I would just like to add that I really appreciate the effort that the Rec Advisory Board put into looking through the different candidates and even having candidates in reserve for if there are future resignations or people who term out, that we have a bench to bring people up and get them on the the Rec Advisory.
Yeah, and the questionnaire was very helpful, being able to read through that and why people wanted to serve on the Recreation Advisory Board, so I thought that
And it was good for me to be able to see those, not only the 3 that you just voted on, but also to see the remaining individuals that are on the bench that are qualified as well. So it gives me a lot to work with.
Great. Okay, are there any other announcements? Yes.
To that end, we'll have one more for you next month.
I know,
Just wanted to give you a heads up.
I've already been informed.
And one other announcement, very important day tomorrow. It's Election Day. If you haven't voted already, please make sure you go and vote. So if no other announcements, I'd entertain a motion for us to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. I'm assuming no one's opposed. All right, the motion carries, and we are adjourned.